Have you ever witnessed a miracle unfold before your eyes? The 2-year-old baby keeps pointing at his father's coffin. What happens next is shocking. Hello, everyone, enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch. St. Michael's Church was shrouded in an atmosphere of mourning, the church bells tolling long, solemn peals, blending with the muffled sobs of the grieving, creating a chilling, heart-wrenching feeling. Clara stood silently beside her husband's coffin, holding little Lucy tightly in her arms. The 2-year-old struggled against her mother's grasp, her small face flushed red from crying too much. Clara bent down to soothe her, but Lucy refused to be calmed. The child's innocent eyes were fixed on the wooden coffin where Samuel lay motionless. "Papa, Papa," Lucy sobbed, her tiny fingers trembling as she pointed toward the coffin. Clara swallowed hard, her hands gripping the black mourning veil. She wanted to cry, but her tears were stuck in her throat. Samuel's sudden death still felt like a nightmare. Just yesterday, he had kissed her before leaving the house, and now all that remained was a cold, lifeless body. Around Clara, the villagers gathered, whispering among themselves. No one understood how a healthy man like Samuel could die so suddenly. Some said it was an accident, while others murmured that it was fate's punishment. Madame Rose, an elderly woman who lived near Clara, stepped closer, her eyes filled with sympathy. She gently placed a hand on Clara's shoulder and whispered, "My dear, I know you're in pain, but little Lucy, are you sure she's all right?" Clara looked down at her daughter and saw that Lucy was trembling, her wide eyes fixed on a dark corner behind the coffin. Suddenly, the child let out a piercing scream. "Papa, Papa is trapped, he's calling for help." The air inside the church grew thick with unease. A murmur spread through the crowd, many exchanging nervous glances, while others hurriedly made the sign of the cross. Madame Rose took a shaky step back, covering her mouth with her hand. "My God, the child can see," she whispered in a voice full of dread. A chill ran down Clara's spine. She turned to Lucy, trying to keep her voice steady. "Lucy, what did you say?" she asked, though her heart was already pounding with fear. "Papa is there, he's calling for help, Mama." "He's trapped," Lucy insisted, still pointing toward the dark corner. A cold breeze swept through the church, making the altar candles flicker. No one spoke, but Clara could feel the tension thickening in the air. Just then, the church doors creaked open with a slow, eerie sound. A tall man stepped inside, his face stern. It was Henry, Samuel's cousin, dressed in a black suit. His dark eyes scanned the crowd before settling on Clara. He approached her with a sympathetic smile that felt strangely insincere. "Clara, you must be exhausted," Henry said, his voice deep and deceptively gentle. "We're all heartbroken over Samuel's passing." Clara only gave a slight nod, too drained to respond. Henry's gaze flickered to Lucy, who was still clutching her mother's dress, staring intently at the dark corner. "The little one is too young to understand. It's best not to let her say such things, it might frighten people," he said, his tone carrying a subtle sharpness. Clara frowned slightly, his words unsettled her. "She's just grieving for her father," she replied, trying to remain composed. Henry nodded, but his expression quickly shifted. "Clara, I hate to bring this up now, but you know Samuel left behind a lot of financial trouble. Your house, it might be best to consider selling it to settle his debts." Clara froze, a wave of dizziness washing over her. "Sell the house? What are you talking about?" Henry sighed with faint concern. Samuel was a good man, but he had his share of troubles. "I'm just thinking about what's best for you and Lucy." A cold dread seeped into Clara's bones. She had never trusted Henry, and now, before Samuel had even been laid to rest, he was already talking about money. Lucy suddenly clung tighter to her mother's hand, her eyes glistening with tears. She pointed at the coffin again and spoke in a small yet clear voice. "Papa is trapped." Henry's head snapped around, his face momentarily frozen. The tension in the church thickened, those standing nearby began inching away, no one daring to speak. Clara crouched down, her heart pounding in her chest. "Lucy, what did you just say?" Lucy looked up at her mother, her tiny face filled with fear. "Papa hasn't left, he's still here, he's calling for Mama." A suffocating silence settled over the church. A woman standing nearby, Margaret, tugged at another's sleeve and whispered, "This is not a good sign. A child so innocent wouldn't lie." Clara tightened her grip on Lucy's little hand, trying to stop herself from trembling. Meanwhile, Henry clenched his jaw, his eyes flickering with unease. Children have vivid imaginations, he forced a chuckle, but Clara noticed his hands balling into fists. She didn't know what was happening, but one thing was certain, something wasn't right. Darkness crept through St. Michael's Church as the altar candles flickered weakly. The air felt heavier than ever after Lucy's words. Those gathered around the coffin began stepping back, avoiding Clara and her daughter as if fearing what might come next. "Papa hasn't left, he's still here, he's calling for Mama," Lucy's words echoed in Clara's mind, sending shivers down her spine. She scanned the crowd until her eyes landed on Henry, the man who had just urged her to sell the house. He still stood there, but his composure seemed to waver, his fingers tapping nervously against the wooden surface of a pew, and his eyes darted away. "Come now, let's not let a child's words stir unnecessary fear," Henry said, forcing another weak smile, but there was a white tremor in his voice. Madame Rose, the oldest in the village, silently made the sign of the cross before murmuring, "There are things beyond our understanding. Sometimes children can see what adults cannot." A shudder ran through Clara's body. She tightened her hold on Lucy. Henry blinked rapidly, then turned back to Clara, attempting to regain control of the conversation. "Clara, I'm just trying to help. We should settle the matter of the house and assets before it's too late. If Samuel were here, he'd want you to take care of everything quickly." Clara's stomach twisted into knots. "Can you leave me alone for a moment?" she said, her voice laced with steel. Henry shrugged, but a flicker of irritation crossed his face. "I'm only trying to help, but if you're too stubborn, I may have no choice but to involve the law." His veiled threat sent an icy chill down Clara's spine. Margaret, a woman from the village, clicked her tongue and whispered to the person beside her, "Absolutely heartless. The man hasn't even been buried yet, and he's already talking about assets." But Henry didn't seem to care about the murmurs around him. "I'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully by then you'll have thought things through," he said before turning and walking out of the church. Clara felt her heart pound, not just from his veiled threat, but from the way he reacted when Lucy mentioned her father. Why had he looked so tense? She glanced down at Lucy, who was still clinging tightly to her dress. "Mama, Papa is still here." Clara took a deep breath, trying not to let panic take over. "Lucy, what do you mean Papa is trapped?" Lucy looked up at her mother with tear-filled eyes and whispered, "Papa is stuck in there, he's calling me, he's scared." The words sent a chilling wave through Clara's body. She turned back toward the coffin. It was made of solid oak, the lid firmly sealed, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Beside her, Madame Rose shook her head and murmured, "The child isn't making things up. I've seen this before." Clara turned to her, her pulse racing. "What do you mean?" Madame Rose was silent for a moment before speaking in a hushed tone. "Many years ago, there was a case. A man was thought to be dead, but he had only fallen into a deep coma. After they buried him, his family kept having nightmares about him." She trailed off, her expression haunted. Clara's throat went dry. She looked back at the coffin, a growing horror creeping into her mind. Lucy hiccuped, then whispered, "Papa is calling me." In that moment, Clara felt her chest tighten. A shiver ran down her spine. No, it couldn't be. Samuel was dead, but was she absolutely sure? Outside, the wind howled through the stained glass windows, creating an eerie sound. The candles on the altar flickered, and then one of them went out. A few villagers exchanged anxious glances, murmuring among themselves, "This is a bad omen," a middle-aged woman whispered. The tension in the church rose like an approaching storm. Clara looked around, feeling as if the walls were closing in. What should she do? No, this was just a coincidence, but what about Samuel? Clara held Lucy tightly, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. Margaret stepped closer and whispered, "Clara, if you have even the slightest doubt, don't let them bury Samuel just yet." The words hit Clara like a knife to the chest. She no longer knew what to believe, but one thing was certain, something was very wrong. St. Michael's Church remained cloaked in darkness as the funeral stretched on longer than expected. The hushed whispers grew louder, filled with unease. The villagers exchanged anxious glances, stepping away from the coffin as if afraid to get too close. Clara stood frozen, her mind in turmoil, while Lucy still clung to her, her innocent eyes filled with fear. Clara, if you have even the slightest doubt, don't let them bury Samuel just yet, Margaret's words echoed in her head. Clara wanted to believe this was just the imagination of a grieving child, but deep down, she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something was off. Henry had left, but the way he reacted when Lucy spoke of her father made Clara more uneasy than ever. Madame Rose suddenly stepped closer, gently tugging at Clara's sleeve. "My dear, perhaps you should trust your instincts," she said, her voice low and serious. Clara looked down at her daughter, Lucy's small hands clutching her dress, trembling. "Mama, Papa is scared." A bone-chilling cold coursed through Clara's veins. No, it wasn't possible. Samuel was dead, but what if he wasn't? The mere thought made it hard for Clara to breathe. She tightened her grip on Lucy, struggling to find logic amidst the rumors, the fearful gazes of the villagers, and the ominous unease that hung in the air. Suddenly, from outside the church, a voice called out, breaking through Clara's spiraling thoughts. "Clara!" She turned sharply. Standing at the entrance was Matthew, a close friend of Samuel. He was panting, his face tense with urgency. "I just heard. I got here late, but there's something you need to know." Clara frowned, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. What could be so important? Matthew strode toward her, lowering his voice. Before he died, he mentioned something important. "I don't know if this is the right time, but it has to do with Henry." Hearing Henry's name made Clara even more uneasy. "Tell me," she said firmly. Matthew glanced around as if making sure no one was eavesdropping, then leaned in closer. "A few days before Samuel passed, he told me Henry kept pressuring him to sell the house. Samuel refused, and the next day, he had his accident." A wave of ice washed over Clara. She recalled Henry's words from earlier, the way he urgently pushed her to sell the house, the way he tried to remain calm when Lucy spoke about Samuel being trapped. Could it be that this wasn't an accident? Clara's hands trembled. "Matthew, are you saying?" Matthew swallowed hard. "I have no proof, but Samuel never trusted Henry. He told me that if anything ever happened to him, you shouldn't trust anyone." Clara felt like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. No, it couldn't be, but the pieces were beginning to fit together in a terrifying way. Lucy suddenly yanked at Clara's sleeve, her eyes wide with fear. "Mama, Papa is crying." The entire church fell into a stunned silence. Madame Rose took a step back, others in the crowd looked at each other in growing dread. "The child, she can really see him," someone murmured. Clara swallowed hard and turned to Lucy. "Lucy, what did you say?" Lucy pointed at the coffin, her voice barely above a whisper. Papa is crying inside." The cold room suddenly became suffocating. Clara felt the blood in her veins freeze. No, it couldn't be, but then a faint sound echoed from the coffin. Thud. No one spoke, no one dared to move. Was it just an illusion? Then the sound came again. Thud, thud. This time, it wasn't just Clara who heard it. The crowd started to stir. Madame Rose trembled, making the sign of the cross over and over. "Dear God," she whispered. Margaret stammered, "Clara, we should open the coffin." Clara couldn't breathe, but just as she was about to step forward, a voice rang out, "No one is to touch it." Everyone turned. Henry had returned. He stood at the entrance of the church, his eyes burning with anger. "Don't let superstition cause chaos. This is ridiculous." But Clara couldn't shake the growing dread. She looked around, the villagers were trembling, their eyes shifting between fear and doubt. Thud, thud, another sound. Clara's face turned pale. Henry clenched his fists, his voice laced with a dangerous warning, "No one is opening that coffin." But his very words only made Clara more certain he was afraid of something. St. Michael's Church was silent, but fear spread through it like a raging storm. The knocking from the coffin left everyone frozen in place. The flickering candles on the altar cast trembling shadows on the cold stone walls. Clara felt her heart nearly stop. She stared at the oak coffin, the place where Lucy had just said Samuel was crying. "No one is opening the coffin," Henry's voice rang out, sharp and frantic. "Everyone, calm down. It's just the wind, just the wood contracting from the weather." But no one believed him. Wood contracting makes knocking sounds? Madame Rose whispered, her eyes haunted. An elderly man, James, a longtime friend of Samuel's father, stood up, his voice firm and unwavering. Henry, why are you afraid of opening the coffin? If you have nothing to hide, let us check. I'm not afraid of anything, Henry nearly shouted, but Clara noticed how his hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Matthew stepped forward, his eyes sharp as a blade. Then let us open it. Thud, the coffin knocked again. Several women in the village shrieked, clutching onto one another. The somber funeral had transformed into a living nightmare. Lucy clung to her mother's dress, tears welling in her big eyes. Mama, Papa is calling you. Clara trembled, but something inside her was burning. She looked up at Henry, her unease turning into a deep, unsettling certainty. What are you hiding, Henry? She demanded, her voice rough with emotion. Henry's eyes widened. Are you insane, Clara? You want to open a coffin just because of a child's nonsense? And what about the knocking? Clara shot back. The wind, I told you, it's just the wind, he merely roared. Then let us open it and prove you're right, Matthew interrupted, stepping forward. No one spoke, the entire church held its breath. Henry swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the coffin as if it were a monster. No, he screamed, his voice cracking, no one is to touch it. But his outburst only condemned him further. James stepped forward, his old yet commanding voice cutting through the tension. Henry, if you keep resisting, you're only making yourself look more suspicious. Henry glared at him, his lips pressed into a tight line, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Suddenly, Lucy let out a piercing scream. Papa, Papa, I'm here. Her cry echoed through the church. Clara felt the floor beneath her feet tremble. Thud, thud, the knocking grew louder, too loud to be an illusion. Some villagers panicked, fleeing toward the door, while others remained rooted in place, their eyes wide with horror. Margaret clutched at her shawl, her voice shaking. If something is wrong, we have to check now. Madame Rose took a deep breath and spoke slowly. Call the priest. If there is a trapped soul, he may be able to help. The mention of the priest made Henry go even paler. No, no one is calling anyone, he barked, but Clara had had enough of the lies. She turned to Matthew, her voice firm and unyielding. Go get Father Manuel right now. Henry lunged forward, trying to stop Matthew, but James grabbed his shoulder, gripping him tightly. You have no right to interfere anymore, Henry. His voice was cold. Henry jerked his arm free, but the fear in his eyes was undeniable. Outside, the church bells tolled heavily, their echoes vibrating through the funeral hall. Matthew ran off to fetch the priest, while inside the church, Clara stood frozen before her husband's coffin, her heart pounding. Lucy hiccuped, whispering through her tears, Papa is waiting for Mama to open the door for him. A shiver ran down Clara's spine. Were her daughter's words true, or was this just the imagination of a grieving child? But then what about the knocking? Henry was definitely hiding something. Clara scanned the room, seeing the fear-stricken faces of the villagers. Everyone understood this was no ordinary funeral. Madame Rose pressed her hands together in desperate prayer. Margaret gripped her cloak tightly, murmuring, if Samuel isn't dead, then maybe we still have time to save him. But what if it was too late? That thought stabbed through Clara's mind like a dagger. She couldn't wait any longer. Whether the priest arrived or not, whether Henry tried to stop them or not, she would uncover the truth. The church bells continued to toll, their heavy chimes reverberating through the grief-stricken air. No one was mourning Samuel anymore, terror had consumed them all. Thud, thud, the knocking from the coffin continued, louder, more desperate. Clara felt her entire body freeze, but her mind was screaming. Was Samuel still alive? It couldn't be, but what if he was? Cold sweat dripped down her back as her trembling hand gripped Lucy's tightly. The little girl was sobbing, her face stricken with fear. Mama, Papa is calling for help. Madame Rose whispered a desperate prayer, while the villagers edged away, too afraid to approach the coffin but unable to look away. Matthew had gone to fetch the priest, but Clara knew she couldn't wait any longer. We have to open the coffin now. Her voice was clear, unwavering, but it struck like a bolt of lightning. No! Henry roared, charging forward, his eyes wild with panic. Are you insane, Clara? This is ridiculous superstition. Who opens a coffin in the middle of a funeral? Clara spun around, locking eyes with him. Then explain it, Henry, what are those sounds? Henry clenched his fists, his voice cracking with panic. The wind, I told you, it's just the wind. Do you think I'm stupid enough to believe that? Clara roared, her eyes burning with fury. Henry opened his mouth to say something, but just then, Matthew appeared at the church doors. The priest is on his way. No, Clara shouted, I can't wait another second. She lunged toward the coffin, reaching for the lid, but Henry suddenly rushed forward, grabbing her wrist. Clara, don't be foolish, he growled, squeezing so tightly that pain shot through her arm. Let me go, Henry. The entire church gasped in horror at Henry's aggression, but he continued to shout, You can't open it, it's disrespectful to the dead. Or are you afraid of something? Clara's words cut through Henry like a blade. He froze, taking advantage of his hesitation. Clara shoved him away and marched toward Samuel's coffin. Matthew and James stepped forward as well. If Samuel is truly dead, we'll see it for ourselves, but if he isn't, James's voice was ice cold. Henry's face turned ghostly pale. No, he screamed, but this time, no one listened. Clara placed her hands on the coffin lid. Beside her, Lucy whispered through her tears, Papa. She took a deep breath. She was ready to open it, but then, slap. Henry's hand shot out, striking Clara hard across the face. A collective gasp of horror echoed through the church. Clara stumbled back, her head spinning from the impact. Matthew roared, lunging forward and grabbing Henry by the collar. What the hell is wrong with you? Henry struggled, but Matthew landed a brutal punch to his face, sending him crashing to the floor. But Clara wasn't focused on them anymore. Her hands remained on the coffin, and the knocking inside hadn't stopped. Thud, thud. Tears streamed down Lucy's cheeks. Mama, Papa is knocking. Clara clenched her jaw, her chest tightening with overwhelming tension. She didn't care about Henry anymore. She didn't care about anyone's objections. She was going to open the coffin. She had to know the truth. Thud, thud, the knocking continued, louder now, reverberating through the entire church. No one could deny it anymore. There was something inside that coffin. Clara's heart pounded like a war drum. She gripped the lid tightly, inhaling sharply. Open it, her voice rang out, clear and resolute. But just as she prepared to lift the lid, a voice screamed, No. Henry lunged forward like a rabid animal, his eyes bloodshot, his face contorted with pure terror. No one opens the coffin. Leave Samuel alone. Smack. Matthew delivered another crushing punch, sending Henry sprawling onto the cold stone floor. He writhed in pain but still shrieked like a madman, Don't open it, don't open it. Clara trembled with rage. What are you so afraid of, Henry? I'm not afraid of anything. Henry screamed, thrashing like a man possessed. You don't understand. Don't open it, don't open it. But Clara had no patience left. She turned to Matthew and James. They nodded. Her hands shook, but her resolve was unshaken. She placed both hands firmly on the coffin lid. Beside her, Lucy sobbed, gripping her mother's dress, Mama, Papa is scared. Clara bit her lip hard. She was about to lift the lid, but Clara, stop, a deep voice boomed from the entrance of the church. Everyone turned. Father Manuel had arrived, his long black robes fluttering slightly as he stepped forward, his face grave and tense. What are you all doing? Matthew quickly approached him. Father, something is wrong. There are noises coming from the coffin. We have to open it. The priest slowly walked forward, his piercing gaze scanning the fearful faces of the villagers before settling on Clara. Are you sure, Clara? Her breath hitched. Was she sure? Beside her, Lucy clutched her hand tighter, her teary eyes glistening. Papa, Papa is scared. Her daughter's words sliced through Clara's heart. She took a shaky breath and looked straight at the priest. I'm not sure, she admitted, her voice trembling, but I can't bury Samuel with doubt in my heart. Father Manuel nodded solemnly. He stepped toward the coffin. The church was deathly silent, no one even dared to breathe. The priest reached out and lightly touched the lid. A suffocating stillness filled the room, and then thud, thud, another knock, louder, more frantic. Madame Rose screamed, and several villagers bolted for the door in sheer terror. Henry writhed on the ground, mumbling like a lunatic, "Don't open it, don't open it, you'll regret this." But no one was listening to him anymore. Clara met the priest's gaze. He nodded, "Open it." But wait, a voice suddenly rang out from the church entrance. Everyone turned in shock. A man burst in, panting heavily, his clothes disheveled as if he had run a great distance. It was Esteban, the forensic doctor. "Stop," he shouted. "Do not open that coffin." The entire church froze. Clara's eyes widened in disbelief. "Why?" she choked out. Esteban rushed forward, his face drenched in sweat. "There's been a mistake," he gasped. "I checked Samuel's death certificate, and something isn't right." No one made a sound. Matthew's fists clenched. "What are you saying?" The forensic doctor swallowed hard, his expression grim. "The death certificate was signed by a doctor I don't recognize. I checked with the hospital, and no one officially confirmed Samuel's death." The air in the church turned to ice. Clara felt her entire body go numb. Henry let out a strangled wail like a cornered animal. "No, no, no." Matthew tightened his fists, his voice like thunder. "What does that mean?" Esteban turned to Clara, his voice heavy as a tombstone. "It means there's a chance Samuel was never dead." The entire church screamed. Clara collapsed to her knees, clutching Lucy. Lucy sobbed, whispering, "Mama, I told you." Clara's eyes widened, her trembling hands clenched her daughter's dress. She turned to the coffin, her hand reached for the lid. She was going to open it, but no. Henry lunged forward like a madman, screaming hysterically, and the church doors suddenly slammed shut. Everything plunged into darkness. Bang! The church doors slammed shut, plunging everything into darkness. Terrified screams erupted. A few villagers shoved each other desperately, trying to escape, but the doors were locked tight. The heavy scent of damp stone, burning candles, and the rapid breathing of dozens of people mixed together, creating a suffocating, almost unbearable atmosphere. Clara clutched Lucy tightly, feeling the child's small body trembling. "Mama," Lucy's voice was so small it was almost inaudible. Clara squeezed her daughter's hand, her heart pounding violently. "It's okay, baby, Mama's here." Suddenly, a voice shrieked in the darkness, "We can't stay here, we need to open the doors." A man rushed forward, banging on the church doors, but they wouldn't budge. Who locked the doors? Matthew pulled out his phone, but there was no signal. Madame Rose began trembling, whispering frantic prayers under her breath. "This is an omen, a punishment." Clara fought to stay calm, but she knew something was terribly wrong. "Someone please open the doors," a woman screamed, but no one responded. Then, a crazed, maniacal laughter rang through the darkness. Everyone turned at once. Henry! He stood in the middle of the church, sweat dripping down his face, his bloodshot eyes filled with madness. "Don't open the coffin, don't open it," he howled, but his voice, once commanding, was now weak with desperation. Father Manuel stepped forward, his tone firm. "Henry, what do you know about this?" Henry staggered back, shaking his head violently. No, don't ask me, don't ask." Matthew stormed toward him, grabbing him by the collar. "What did you do to Samuel?" Henry broke down, but this time he was no longer the arrogant, controlling man he had been. He crumpled to the floor, his entire body shaking. I didn't mean to." Clara clenched her fists, her voice razor-sharp. "What did you do, Henry?" He sobbed, his words barely comprehensible. "I just wanted what was mine. I just wanted Samuel to sell the house, but he refused." A cold shiver ran down Clara's spine. "So you killed him?" "No." Henry screamed, then collapsed into helpless sobs. "I didn't kill him. I only wanted to scare him. I put something in his drink, just to knock him out, but he never woke up." The entire church was paralyzed with horror. Clara felt the world spin, a deafening ringing in her ears. "You drugged my husband?" Henry nodded, sweat dripping from his brow. "I didn't know he was allergic." "I didn't know." "When I realized he wasn't waking up, I panicked." "So you forged the death certificate?" Matthew growled. Henry shuddered. "I had no other choice. I bribed the doctor to fake the paperwork. I thought he was already dead." "You thought?" Clara's voice cracked, her fists trembling. You didn't even check? Henry cowed, unable to meet her gaze. I was too afraid. And you let them bury him? Henry sobbed uncontrollably, but there was no pity left for him. No, I didn't know. I didn't know. I never thought, but he couldn't finish his sentence because, at that exact moment, bang, 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 the pounding inside the coffin grew so violent the entire church trembled. A chorus of screams erupted. Henry's eyes bulged, his face drained of all color. No, it can't be. Father Manuel made the sign of the cross before commanding, "Open the coffin." Clara took a deep breath, her hands shaking, but she knew this was the most important moment of her life. She turned to Matthew and nodded, "Do it." Matthew and James stepped forward, placing their hands on the coffin lid. A chilling wind swept through the church. Henry shrieked in panic, "No, don't open it, don't open it." But it was too late. Matthew and James lifted the coffin lid. A heart-wrenching cry tore from Clara's throat, "Samuel!" The coffin was open. Clara fell to her knees, her vision blurred by tears. Samuel was there, he was alive. His body trembled, his skin ghostly pale, his lips cracked from dehydration, his eyes fluttered open, weak but unmistakably conscious. "Samuel!" Clara screamed, rushing to him, her hands trembling as they touched his face. "Samuel, I'm here, I'm here." Lucy burst into tears, sobbing, Papa, I'm here." A faint breath escaped his lips. Gasps and cries of shock filled the church. Samuel was not dead, he had been buried alive. The villagers recoiled in horror, some women wept in disbelief, others covered their mouths in shock. Matthew ripped off his coat and wrapped it around Samuel. "Quick, we need to get him help." Father Manuel knelt beside Samuel, gripping his hand, his voice calm but urgent, "Someone bring water." Margaret sprinted toward the back of the church, searching for water. Clara sobbed, her tears falling onto Samuel's hand. "Don't leave me, Samuel, don't leave Lucy, please." Lucy clutched her father's arm, her tiny hands squeezing tightly as she hiccuped between sobs. Samuel's lips trembled as if he wanted to speak, but he was too weak. Then suddenly, a shriek cut through the chaos. No, this is a demon." Everyone turned. Henry was crawling across the church floor, his face twisted in sheer terror. "No, Samuel is dead, he has to be dead." Matthew's fury exploded, he lunged at Henry, delivering a brutal punch that sent him sprawling to the ground. "Shut the hell up." Henry whimpered but still screamed like a madman. No, Samuel can't be alive." Clara rose to her feet, her eyes burning with rage. "Why are you so afraid, Henry?" Her voice was sharp and cutting. Henry sobbed, backing away, his entire body trembling. I didn't mean to." James roared, "You buried him alive." The villagers gasped, their fear shifting into righteous fury. Some looked horrified, others furious at the monstrous truth that had just been revealed. Madame Rose clutched her rosary, tears streaming down her aged face. "He is the devil, he is truly the devil." Margaret hissed, "Call the police, this crime cannot go unpunished." Father Manuel nodded, signaling to Matthew, "We must get Samuel outside, he needs urgent care." Matthew and several village men carefully lifted Samuel from the coffin. Clara grasped her husband's hand, her voice breaking. "Samuel, hold on, you have to live." Lucy sniffled, patting her father's face with her small hands. "Papa, wake up, I miss you so much." Samuel let out a weak breath, his tear-filled eyes meeting Clara's. He had heard everything, he had nearly been buried alive, and his own daughter had saved him. Outside, sirens blared. 2 police cars screeched to a stop in front of the church, followed by an ambulance. Sheriff Anderson stepped out, his sharp eyes scanning the shaking crowd. "What the hell is going on here?" Matthew rushed forward, yelling, "Henry tried to kill Samuel. He bribed the doctor, faked the death certificate, and buried him alive." The entire church erupted. Sheriff Anderson turned to Henry, his face ice cold. "Arrest him immediately." 2 officers stormed forward, yanking Henry to his feet. No, I'm innocent. Henry thrashed wildly, but the officers tightened the handcuffs and forced him down onto the cold floor. "You will pay for everything you've done," Matthew growled. Sheriff Anderson turned to Clara, his voice deep and firm. "We will conduct a full investigation." Samuel will be taken to the hospital immediately. Clara nodded, tears still streaming down her face. She turned back to Samuel, feeling his weak breaths against her skin, but there was now a glimmer of light in his eyes. "You're going to live, Samuel, you're going to live." Lucy smiled, her tiny hands wrapped around her father's. "Papa, can we go home?" Samuel's lips parted, his voice hoarse but filled with love. "Yes, let's go home." St. Stephen's Hospital, 3 days later. The early morning sun filtered through the hospital window, casting a soft glow on Samuel's face. His breathing was steadier now, his hollow cheeks slightly fuller, though his eyes were still heavy with emotion as he gazed at Clara and Lucy sitting beside him. "Papa!" Lucy jumped onto the hospital bed, wrapping her small arms around him. Her tiny hands gently traced his face as if making sure he was real. "Papa, you're back." Samuel gave a weak smile, his gaze brimming with warmth. "I'm sorry, my love." His voice was rough, but each word was filled with emotion. Clara gripped his hand tightly, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Do you know how scared we were?" Samuel nodded slowly, his expression filled with sorrow. "I heard everything." Clara froze. "What do you mean?" Samuel took a deep breath, his voice thick with emotion. "When I was trapped in that coffin, I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, but I heard you. I heard Lucy. I heard Henry lying." "Dear God," Clara sobbed, throwing her arms around him. Lucy clung to his arm, her voice pure and bright. "But Mama saved you." "I heard you calling me, Papa." Samuel looked at his daughter, his eyes misty. "Thank you, my little angel." Lucy beamed and hugged him tightly. Outside the hospital room, Matthew and Father Manuel waited. As Clara stepped out, Matthew approached, his voice steady. "Henry has been locked up, he's going to trial." Clara nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. Father Manuel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his voice calm and reassuring. "Samuel was saved, that is what matters most." Clara took a deep breath, then gave a faint smile. "Yes, what matters most is that he's alive." 1 week later, Castleton Provincial Court. The courtroom was packed, filled with villagers who had come to witness justice being served. Henry was led in, his hands shackled tightly, his face gaunt, his eyes filled with fear. The prosecutor read the charges, each word slicing through the air like a blade. "The defendant, Henry Jimenez, is charged with attempted murder, falsification of a death certificate, and the deliberate burial of a living person, Samuel Herrera." A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom, but Clara remained focused on one thing: Henry. He no longer looked smug or powerful, now he was nothing more than a coward, trembling in the face of his fate. "The court will now deliver the sentence." "Wait," a voice rang out. Everyone turned. Samuel stood there, leaning on a cane, but his gaze was steady and resolute. He locked eyes with Henry, his voice calm but piercing. "I have something to say before the court sentences him." The judge nodded, motioning for him to proceed. Samuel stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Henry, I don't hate you." The entire courtroom fell silent. "But I despise you," Samuel's voice was sharp as steel. "You betrayed our family, you betrayed your own honor, and now you will face the consequences." Henry collapsed to his knees, sobbing, but no one felt pity for him. The judge struck the gavel. "The defendant, Henry Jimenez, is hereby sentenced to 25 years in prison." Applause erupted, but Clara only closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The nightmare was finally over. 1 month later, the Herrera home was bathed in golden sunlight. Samuel stood on the porch, looking out at the vast fields, his hand clasped firmly in Clara's. Lucy ran across the yard, her laughter ringing through the air. "We're really home," Clara whispered. Samuel nodded, his eyes filled with peace. Thank you both." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, her heart finally at ease. Samuel squeezed her hand, whispering, "I will never leave you and Lucy again." Lucy ran up to them, throwing her arms around both of them. "We're a family, no one can take us apart anymore." Clara smiled brightly, pressing a gentle kiss to her daughter's forehead. "That's right, my love, we will always be together." The sun shone down on them, illuminating a new beginning, a story of truth, justice, and love. This tale proves that the truth cannot remain buried forever, and in the end, justice prevails. Clara and Lucy never gave up, and because of their unwavering love, Samuel was saved, and the villain was brought to justice. It teaches us that a mother's intuition and the love of family are the strongest forces in the world. At the same time, it warns against greed and deception, for no matter how well one hides their crimes, they will always face the consequences. Persistence and righteousness will always lead to victory. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel, Dark Stories. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon, brought to you by Dark Stories.